everyone. I think we've still got quite a few people joining us, so I'll just give it a few minutes as everyone gets into the room and gets their cameras turned. But hopefully you can see both my name and my face and the presentation on the screen ready to go. So my name is Jess. I am a Global Development Project Coordinator here at the University of Queensland. And today I wanted to thank you all for joining us for the first Global Development Community Practice for 2024. So just as everyone pops into the room, I'll let you know that this session will be recorded and we'll be sharing it with those who have registered who are members of the Global Development Community of Practice at UQ, both internal and external. If you'd like to not be on the recording, you're welcome to ask questions using the chat feature to keep your cameras off throughout the recording, but also feel free to use those features towards the end. Very excited that we've got three wonderful presentations to share with you today. So the first will be coming from one of our colleagues, Risti, and I'll give you a bit more of an update on some of the others, and I'll give you a proper introduction shortly. Sorry, just managing the admits in the... but I don't want to hold everyone up for too long, so we'll jump straight in. And what I would like to do is I'd like to please first acknowledge the traditional owners and the custodianship on the lands in which we're joining from here today. I pay my respects to their ancestors and the descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. The continuation of cultural expression and identity is really important to me. I am a Welshwoman who I now call Meanjin or Brisbane as my home, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity to continue to be able to learn from and heed the stories of the Indigenous peoples of this country. And I recognise the valuable contributions they continue to make to Australian and global society. So thank you anybody who's joining us today who identifies as Indigenous to Australia or your own country of origin. Thank you. So the wonderful humans that we have with us today are Dr. Risti Permani, who will give a brief introduction. Erin Lord-Lynch, unfortunately couldn't join us here today, but has very kindly recorded her presentation, and we'll be listening to her today as well. And we also have Janine Chalmers, who'll be joining us live. So they'll be sticking around after their presentations to hopefully have a conversation with you. We can continue asking questions at the end. But for now, as questions pop into your mind, if you'd like to pop them into the chat, and then I'll make sure that we come back to them at the end of the session. But a quick introduction. So Risti is a senior lecturer in agribusiness at UQ of Science. And Risti is passionate about promoting food security and has led multiple international research and development projects and capacity building programs to support food and agricultural sectoral development ranging from international trade, global value chains, digital transformation in agriculture, and evaluation. Thank you very much, Risti, for joining us here today. Erin Lord-Lynch is a Senior Project Officer here at the University of Queensland School of Environment. Erin is excited about the power of education and fostering sustainable and equitable change in global development. She has led various capacity building projects focused on education and training in global development. And currently she contributes towards the Coral Reef Rescue Project, working actively with local partners to develop learning resources that integrate local knowledge with the best practices, aiming to strengthen coral reef conservation and coastal community resilience. As mentioned, unfortunately can't join us, but she's included her contact details at the end of her slides. So you're welcome to reach out to her directly if you have any questions for Erin at the end of this presentation. And last, by no means least, we have Janine. Janine Chalmers is a development coordinator at UQ's International Development Unit, to which she brings extensive experience as a project coordinator. At UQ, she's been involved in coordinating various development projects, including Australia Awards programs, and her work has focused on the delivery in the fields of gender equity, disability and social inclusion, sustainable construction and climate, and she has extensive experience in the provision of high-level and culturally sensitive pastoral care and psychosocial support for culturally and linguistically diverse people through programs at University in Queensland and within her roles throughout the Asia Pacific. Thank you once again, everyone, for joining us. Risti, I'm going to be turning myself off now and handing straight over to you. If you'd like to turn your camera on, please head.
Thanks very much, Jess. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, Jess, for having me and colleagues at the Global Development team. So I'm going to share some experience that I have throughout my journey being part of this global development. It's, as you all know, like it's a massive work, and probably what I shared today, there are a couple of things that relate to you and then something that we can discuss further in the questions and answer sessions. So next, please. So I'd like also begin my session by acknowledging the Jaguar people and the Turrbal people, the traditional custodians of the Meanjin, Brisbane, where I'm speaking from today. And I guess for me, as someone coming from Indonesia, it's been a privilege to learn so much about this First Nations culture. And as we continue our journey in global development, I think we should not lose sight of the traditional and wisdom that the traditional custodians of these people have shared with us. So I pay respects to the ancestors and descendants who continue their cultural and spiritual connections to the country and recognize their contributions to Australian global society. Next slide, please. So I'm going to structure my session into 3 parts. So first of all, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we are living in a changing environment and to create some impact. I think that's what this community of practice is about. I think making alignment to the global Australian and also institutional context continue to be important when we do research, when we do capacity building programs. And some of the experience that I have, and I try to relate that to the conceptual framework that I used in some of the activities, the capacity building activities that we do here at UQ, and some lessons and that I try to derive from my experience. Next, please. So just to be I guess, align with the current environment. When I look at the global development, we're living in at least 3 levels of context. The first one is the global context, as we know. And the work that we do has been highly influenced by what's happening in the world. For example, during COVID, there's a lot of research and capacity building try to address this issue, like how we can collectively address the pandemic. So the direction of the world partnership also shifts alongside with the changing, focus on topics. For example, like back then, sustainable development has been, a key priority for a lot of international development research and development. But these days is, we try to define a bit better what it means by sustainability. Is that about inclusiveness? Is it about green and so on? And the other thing is that the important levels of partners. So, for example, I'm coming from Indonesia, and I can see the increased importance of Indonesia from the Australian perspective. Indonesia grows to become, one of the biggest economy in the world. Now it becomes even more critical for Australia to partner with Indonesia in an international development context. And in Australia, as we know, the government's funding scheme change, priority topics also change, priority regions or sectors also change. And this affects one of the most important impact of this is that the changing funding availability, which also drives the direction of where the global development is headed to. And institutional context is also important. For UQ, for example, we've got this global engagement framework that identifies and support programs that are seen as priorities. And if you look at the UQ strategic plan 2022 to 2025, UQ's vision is to acknowledge leadership for a better world. So there is already a global context as part of the UQ strategic plan, and the mission is to deliver public good through education, research, and engagement with partners both at local, national, and also global. And again, global context becomes important. Next, please. So what it means in terms of influencing, pathways to impact, and my apologies if there's like some wording that should not be put there. So some typical pathways to impact, as we know in international development, there are at least 4. One is first commercialization, adoption of new change practices, capacity building, and then regulation and policy. So a lot of people think when we think about international development, it's about just influencing policy, whilst actually when we do international development work, we know that there are also other parts of or pathways or channels that we can use, such as developing the practices, the commercialization. And I use this from, like the agriculture domain. So maybe some of the examples here are more related to my area of work. But for me, understanding at least these typical pathways to impact can help us to sort of understand and determine which pathway that we want to focus more at the start of our international development work. Next, please. Now, when okay, so in all the development work that I do, I always develop what is called as impact pathway. And I think this is, everyone here probably is very familiar with this, but basically we just need to translate what and understand what input we need in our work, what activities that we need to do, what we are trying to produce, or what we call as outputs. And we have to sort of map when people increase their awareness and using the outputs that we produce from our international development work, what would happen? And that's the outcomes. Impact takes much longer. And I think sometimes people are not patient enough to see that this transition from what we see as actually just outputs and turning that into impact. And there are a lot of issues that we can discuss further. For example, funding agency, they probably can only see the outputs, because to look at the impact, some might take 20 years, some might take 5 years. So depending on the complexity of the topic and so on. But having this, mapping this pathway will help us understand which channel that we want to go through and what the resources that we need to achieve the impacts that we're trying to get. Next, please. So using that sort of concept as part of the work that I do, this is what I experience in terms of global development. So my journey, I guess, it's quite a typical academic stuff. I started from a postdoc and then, became a lecturer back then at the Adelaide University. But I've been fortunate enough to have experience working at the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in Jakarta, as the assistant director for the integration monitoring and directorate. And that's when I feel that I gained much in terms of the policy influencing skills. Before then, I moved back to Australia to work for Deakin and then Queensland. Next, please. So I guess the privilege that I have as the academic staff, and I feel very fortunate, is that one of the things that I'm very passionate about is teaching. So I get to know my students, local as well as the international students. And teaching might not be, might not be seen as a typical pathway of global development. But I feel like through teaching, we can also develop our networks. We've got a lot of international students, for example, in Australia, through which we can actually get the connections in the country, partner countries, and then also, in 5 years, 10 years time, they become leaders in their own fields, and that can also help get that connection. Next slide, please. And the other thing I do is through engagement. We do engagement with the funding agency, which I find that's very important. So, Crawford Fund Conference, for example, probably a lot of colleagues have been participating in that kind of conference, next one in August, and also with the industry. And industry plays an increased, importance in the work that we do. They also increasingly, finance some of the international development work. And we've seen some examples that our colleagues do where there's public-private partnership to do some development work in other countries. And I guess for agriculture, for example, that's very relevant because of the agriculture-oriented focus of export-oriented focus of agriculture. Next one, please. And through research, we can also influence policy. And again, as I mentioned before, I get an opportunity to, be part of the regional meetings. And it's a very complex skill to develop. But one of the things that I find it's important is that research is important. Like having a robust scientific finding is important so that we can, convince the policymakers. Next one, please. And communication with policymakers, I think, is another essential skill that colleagues in the international development space should have. And I quote this from my colleague, Associate Professor Elske at the UQ. So she develops a course for ACR, the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, called the Science Communication. And I like the wording that she used, that scientific language needs to be repackaged. Not because policymakers are not smart enough, but because they just need to know just enough information, not too much, not too detailed in a lot of senses, but just enough so that they can make informed decisions. And as we know, in Australia, there are many different pathways to do that. Submitting to the Senate inquiry, for example, is one of those channels. I get invited to a couple of like ASEAN forums, and for example, this one, the webinar that was on food security, and they're turning that into a policy brief, then that they then circulate it to policymakers. That's also another, a pathway to impact. Next, please. And global engagement important. And again, when I look at global engagement, there are many different pathways, and it's not just about, as simple as just because you're a researcher, then you just need to do research. I engage with partner universities. For example, in China, we've got this Yunnan Agriculture University. We develop like articulation programs, double degree agreement. I get the opportunity to talk to facilitate bilateral dialogue between Indonesia and Australia on livestock issues a couple of years ago, and also become like an expert panel for Australian government agencies to review international development work. So, and I feel that experience, even through reviewing, that can help me to play this small part, although that might be just a minor role in this global development, to emphasize the directions which I think the international development should pursue. For example, gender. There are a lot of projects that haven't really addressed about gender, and through that role as the expert reviewer, then I can get opportunity to sort of emphasize that to the project team members, that the importance of gender. Next, please. So this is just an example of how exactly we developed that. And I think I see a couple of colleagues who got involved in this activity. So we recently completed this short course funded by the Australia Awards on women in STEM, with participants coming from Mongolia. So we developed this impact pathway at the start. Before we apply for the funding, we identified key themes such as leadership, partnership, inclusivity, and then innovation and research productivity. And then we define what are the activities that participants should do, what the outcomes that we hope to see once they complete their short course and they implement the skills that they learn during their time in Australia and in the Return to Work Plan project in their own field. And what's the big impact that we want to see, which is the more equitable and inclusive STEM community in Mongolia. So although this sounds very conceptual, but it really helps us to sort of revisit again, review again, when we develop an activity, one session, or invite a speaker, like which of this channel that they're trying to achieve, so that we know that we're on the right track to achieve that, the big impact that we want to see in the next, 1, 2, and even maybe 10 years, that what will it take to achieve the impact. Next, please. And so this is another example. So we got a funding last year from like bilateral Indonesia, Australia funding schemes called Connect C. We apply system thinking. That's another, I guess, there's strong interest in this system thinking application, multidisciplinary, and we've got a lot of capacity building as part of this project. So that's which is on the peri-urban food system resilience. And yeah, we work with a lot of partners, which I think that also helps our competitiveness when we got the funding. Next, please. So, and this is another Connexi project that we just got the outcome 2 weeks ago. So our application been successfully accepted by the funding agency. Here, where we focus much on the JEDC, the gender equality, disability, and social inclusion. So again, impact pathway on the left-hand side is important so that we determine, what are the activities we want to do. Stakeholder engagement and GETC has become like a cross-cutting theme. And then our intended impact is the sustainable and healthy societies and food security in Indonesia. So on the right-hand side, I thought I should just put there some activities that we can apply in global development work to demonstrate our commitment to GETC. So it should start from setting up the project team members, like what's the percentage of female lead researchers in your team, and up to the point when we do data collection, when we interpret the data, when we engage with the policymakers and so on. Yeah, that's just another example. So I know I'm running out of time, so I'll probably will go very quickly. What's the lessons learned from all this experience that I try to share here? So next slide, please. So, well, the first one, I think, as we all know, partnerships often evolve. So I touch on academic research engagement, and sometimes all this change. Like we started a partnership with a university in Indonesia called IPB University from research collaboration, but then we turned that into academic. But I think what it means is that as our work with partners, our communication with partners should also evolve. We should not just be complacent with just sitting as a research partner, because it might be expanded to other areas. Having clarity of impact pathway, I find that's very important. And I sure, like how I developed the impact pathway in a number of projects that I lead. It's important in terms of sort of like a checklist, whether we're still on track, and for monitoring and evaluation. System approach, although I haven't touched much, is a huge thing now. So if you're still adopting like just one discipline-specific perspective, you probably want to revisit your approach. We need to work with colleagues from other disciplines. And it's not just about multidisciplinary, but it's transdisciplinary. So when we develop, a new perspective, leveraging, the perspectives from these different disciplines. Understanding the funding agencies' expectations is really important. And as you know, they are also changing. They're changing in terms of their structure, priority as tasked by the government, and so on. So it's important to have that connection with the funding agencies. Next, please. And this is more like a personal reflection. I always believe that it should be called a partnership when we work with other people. It should not be based on a transactional basis. That I give this to you, you have to give me back something. Sometimes we need to consider long-term gains when we approach like a short-term investment. Mutual respect is very important. And I think I feel like I have to mention this when, especially us coming from Australia, like when we engage with partners from, least developed countries, for example, because they might, their economy is changing, their political importance is also shifting. So our partnership should be based on that mutual respect. Partnerships take time to grow, flourish, and be formalized. So we have to be patient, and we do need support, both at the institutional level and the collegiate level. Global development needs heroes, not just a hero. So we have to work with colleagues to achieve the impact that we're trying to achieve. And at the end of the day, as much as we believe that, institutional partnerships is important, at the end of the day, I always believe that it's about people-to-people relationship. There needs to be someone in the partner institution to drive the changes. And same thing, we have to drive the change that we want to see. Last time, and this is a reminder for myself, prioritizing is very important. We've got a very limited capacity. And that's why, again, the importance of working with other people. I've got one last slide, just sorry. And I think from my perspective, as part of the UQ, knowledge is a public good. And this is a very economic term. I'm coming from economics background. I think not just UQ, but all institutions in Australia, given all the experience that we have, expertise we have, we do have responsibility to share that with our partner countries. Not about teaching, but more about working together so that we can achieve the impact that we want to see in our global development work. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Risti. Thank you very much. That was absolutely fabulous. I really appreciate you taking the time to go through all of that. And there was a lot of content there as well. So I really do appreciate that. If you can stick with us till the end, we'll try and hold off on questions until then. But I noticed that a few of you have fed back to us. So thank you so much that we've had some issues with the sharing. So I'm currently based in a meeting room working off a single screen laptop. We've tried to get the big screen up. So we're going to see if I can do a share on the big screen to you guys instead. Our next presentation will be the pre-recorded presentation from Erin. So if you wouldn't bear with me just for a moment or so, and I'll see if I can make sure that's working. And if you can also just make sure to let me know that you can definitely hear it on your end as well. But thank you very much, Risti. We look forward to speaking to you again at the end.
Good afternoon. I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to be part of the Global Development Community of Practice Pathways to Impact session. A special thank you to Ben from UQID for suggesting me as a speaker. I've been asked to speak about global development impact through consultancy, specifically my work with local partners on the Global Environment Facility funded project Coral Reef Rescue, Resilient Coral Reefs, Resilient Communities. Please forgive the formatting of the slides you're about to see. I've thrown these together quickly as I am unfortunately unable to attend today's event in person. And please forgive my nose, I'm a little bit nasally as well. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which I am recording this presentation on today and pay my respects to their ancestors and their descendants. I began my career many years ago now as a teacher, and it was during this period that I came to understand the unique power and impact of education for capacity building, empowerment, and transformation. However, I was also struck by the challenges and tensions of education's best practice and policy with the lived experience of both teachers and students, particularly those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. A desire to understand this apparent disparity is what started me on my global development journey. I had the privilege of completing the Master of Development Practice here at UQ. There's a snap of my wonderful cohort at the time. Since completing my master's, I've had the opportunity to work on several capacity building projects centered around education and training in the global development context, including a suite of courses designed to support emerging leaders in global development and a training program for teachers across Asia, Africa, and the Pacific designed to support their adoption of technology for teaching literacy and numeracy. Moving on to my current project, UQ and the Coral Reef Rescue Project are part of a broader global multi-stakeholder initiative led by WWF called the Coral Reef Rescue Initiative. The initiative coordinates funding applications like the Global Environment Facility grant that supports this project. The Coral Reef Rescue Project aims to create an enabling environment for successful coral reef conservation and coastal community resilience in target countries. Both the broader initiative and this specific project aim to protect the health of coral reef ecosystems in the face of climate threats such as ocean warming. Through research led by UQ and partners, coral reefs that are less exposed to climate change stress have been identified. The project works in 6 countries where these climate refuge coral reefs are located: Fiji, the Solomon Islands, Indonesia, the Philippines, Madagascar, and Tanzania. The overall project objective is to strengthen capacity and solutions that ensure long-term survival of climate refuge coral reef ecosystems, and thereby conserving their biodiversity and supporting the blue economies and communities that depend on them. My work with the School of the Environment and the Coral Reef Rescue Project, working under Professor Ove Hoeg Goldberg and alongside my colleagues Lauren Reckie Banner and Melanie Johnson, involved contributing my skills and experience to the development of a suite of learning resources for the Coral Reef Rescue Project. This work is related to component 1 of the project, which aims to connect stakeholders with a global network of knowledge and best practice. Resources that we're developing include up to 4 online courses, 6 virtual learning events such as workshops or Q&As, and to support the facilitation of communities of practice at local level. Working with local partners, my role involves facilitating a process of collaborative participation to determine the gaps in their access to knowledge, education and training, their needs and preferences for new learning resources, and developing mechanisms for ongoing input and feedback to ensure that the outputs reflect their lived experiences, cultural contexts, and support them to achieve their conservation and development goals. The process we have followed includes the joint development and design with local partners of a needs assessment survey for target learners that was made available in 5 key languages. The translation is one of the key accessibility tools we are using in this project, and this has been made more achievable through the recent breakthroughs in AI translation technology. We still have the translations checked for accuracy by native speakers, particularly the technical scientific terms, but the automation makes the process much quicker and easier. The findings from the survey were used as part of a knowledge proposal design workshop that we held with local partners and other experts. The goal of the workshop was to create a high-level strategic plan that would guide ongoing work throughout our part of the project. The draft proposal has been through 2 rounds of review and feedback with our local partners and is nearing completion. We are currently working on creating a more detailed curriculum plan for the online courses and getting local partner input into those. A key insight into effective collaboration is that it takes a long time, particularly when, in our case, there are lots of diverse stakeholders. So it has been a challenge to allow the necessary time for genuine participation and relationship building, while also meeting project work plans and timelines. The Coral Reef Rescue Project does embrace the concept of adaptive management, so we do have some flexibility, which we have taken advantage of, and this has been really important. I see my role as being an advocate for the needs and preferences of our local partners and stakeholders. There are always so many different tensions with these kinds of projects, and it can be easy to lose sight of the most important objective, and that is to achieve impact for our local stakeholders. As I mentioned earlier, in our part of the project, the impact we are seeking is to connect stakeholders and beneficiaries with a global network of knowledge and best practice. The challenging aspect of this is not that there's a lack of existing resources and materials. The challenge is largely access for our stakeholders. The translation of materials is key here. We plan to translate the online courses into 4 languages to increase access to learning. We know that adult learners learn best when they have access to the right learning at the right time. So we hope that by working with partner organizations and curating access to relevant existing materials and developing new material only where gaps exist, we are able to most effectively use our resources to achieve the greatest impact for our stakeholders. For example, during our local partner workshops, a very strong message that came through was the need to integrate local and traditional knowledge with scientific knowledge to most effectively manage and conserve coral reef ecosystems. While this is certainly an area of growing academic interest, there seems to be a lack of accessible guided instruction, such as through an online course. So this is one of the areas that we will focus on. I also want to mention the project's strong commitment to gender responsive approaches, which is vital to achieving sustainable and equitable impact for communities. The concept includes intersectionality and a wider concern for inclusion more generally. So we work to always recognise women and men's different needs, constraints, and opportunities. One of the things that I love about online learning is that it overcomes many of the constraints that traditional face-to-face learning may pose, particularly for women, assuming, of course, the learners have access to the internet. Across all the project activities, we aim to have equal participation of men and women to ensure diverse perspectives are included. As I mentioned earlier, we've had to be flexible with our implementation of the project. This has meant that we have already developed one of the 4 courses as an introductory pilot course. The objective of this course is to provide all of our learners with a shared understanding of the challenges faced by coral reef ecosystems and the adjacent coastal communities, and a collective commitment to important principles that will guide conservation and management interventions moving forward. We've also been able to test out some of our strategies and approaches. This free course, led by Professor Ove Goldberg, and including a range of other experts in their field, was released in October 2023 on the edX platform. So far, it's attracted over 600 learners globally and has received really positive feedback. A highlight of the course is the active participation of learners on the discussion board, which is really encouraging for our goal of facilitating and supporting networks of knowledge. In terms of other impacts or outcomes, I don't have a lot to report at this time since we're still in the earlier phases of the project in terms of our component. My hope, though, is that because we've taken the time to build relationships and engage in genuine collaboration and partnerships with our local stakeholders and understand their needs and preferences, we will achieve impactful outcomes for people, communities, and their ecosystems. So I think that's just about my time up, so I will stop there. Please do feel free to email me any follow-up questions. I'm very excited and happy to discuss this project further. Thank you for having me today.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thanks Jess for having me here as part of this community. What a pleasure. Thank you so much Risti, thank you Erin. It's absolute delight to hear your presentations. Risti, the people-to-people relationships and connections is definitely something that I hold strong in my heart in the land of ID. If we can go back to the first slide, thanks ladies. And Erin, understanding the disparity, this is really what set me on my journey in the land of ID. So here is a little introduction from me and my background and what we do here in UQ ID project delivery. So here we are, Papua to Tongata UQ. It's how did I get here and why. Next slide, thanks. So this is where my journey started. I spent 4.5 years here at the Freeport Indonesian mine site. I'm not too sure if many of you know of this place. It was quite a phenomenal place for me to live. It does get a lot of bad press, Papua, West Papua, but I hold it dear to my heart. I have very, very many fond memories. And a key takeaway here for my time was definitely the massive shift in my thinking about my opportunities and my privilege. This town here, Tembagapura, let's go back, thank you. This town, Tembagapura, we lived here as expats. There was a big Indonesian working community here, and we also were living in amongst the locals from surrounding tribes. Thanks so much. Next slide. So with my big shift in thinking and my life there in Papua, I decided to delve into the land of ID studies. This certainly helped me navigate my shift in thinking and my privilege and how I saw life in the international development sector. This took me on to uni and over to Tonga, where I lived for a year with my children. I went across as a DFAT AVID, an Australian Volunteer for International Development. I'm sure many of you have heard of this program. I worked here with the Ministry of Health. We were doing the Universal Healthcare Rural and Remote Outreach Program. I was working here with the DFAT advisors and the medical superintendent of the hospital. Thoroughly enjoyed my time here and immersed myself in the Tongan culture, lived with the Tongan family, which was an absolute delight. And a key takeaway of my time here was, you know, life is all about opportunity, and many of us get that more than others. That was a big one for me. Oh, and of course, my children. They forgave me and they still love me. Next slide, thanks. From my time in Tonga as an avid, I then came back to Australia and I secured work with the international development sector within Cardno. Here we worked with the multilateral funders, the DFAT ADB World Bank, on major infrastructure projects in the Asia Pacific. So my work here, I was working with remote teams, answering to a regional director who was based in Vanuatu. These projects were sort of bridges, roads, hospitals, school rebuilds, all infrastructure focused in these areas: Tonga, Solomons, Nauru, Tuvalu, Vanuatu and Papua New Guinea. Next slide, thank you. From here, this work has taken me here to international development here at UQ. So here I absolutely see myself as sharing stories and knowledge. And thank you very much, Risti. We have much pleasure in inviting yourselves and your fellow colleagues with your expertise into our programs for us to be able to build programs for all these wonderful groups of people. Next slide, thanks. So a lot of you probably already know of UQID, but for those that don't, it's the University of Queensland International Development Unit. We do long-term development projects, customised short-term training and professional development, and we do consultancy advisory and technical assistance. And a big aim of what we do here in our delivery with our partners is to achieve their development goals. So we have our short course awards under the Australia Awards program, and this is where the Australia Awards country teams receive funding from the DFAT Australia Award program, and they determine which area of focus that they are going to put their program attendees into. This is what I like about this program. It's about achieving their development goals, not us saying that this is what we would like you to do. So last year, 2023, we saw 37 global development projects in progress or completed. 15 of 17 of our SDG goals were addressed in these projects. And the impact here is that over 840 participants have been impacted by our UQID programs in all their shapes and forms. Next slide, thanks. So project delivery in UQ is absolutely end-to-end program management. So we engage the UQ core services teams as a starting point. And right here, I'd like to give a big shout out to our teams over in payroll, HR, UQ tax, UQ finance, casual appointments. I know we're usually screaming, asking for quick advice and quick help in getting our programs going. We manage our program budgets. We onboard to UQ systems. It's about relationship building, engaging the faculties, strong stakeholder communications, coordination, contracting and logistics. It's from program start to program finish. Next slide, thank you. As an example of the projects that we have and which Risti has spoken very strongly to, thanks again, Risti. One of the programs that we did last year was a direct source program. It was the infrastructure improvement for shrimp aquaculture project, Indonesia. And this was a collaboration with the School of Environment and Genetics, who are based here at UQ at St. Lucia campus. And we were able to invite esteemed professionals as guest presenters into this program also. The Directorate General of Aquaculture was who reached out to UQID as a means to build a program in professional development for this cohort from Indonesia. If we move to the next slide, I can give you a snapshot of how this happens. So essentially ADB, we're giving a loan to the Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Fisheries, who then would seek to give this loan to the Directorate General of Aquaculture in Indonesia. Associate Professor Ron Johnson from the School of Environment. He was our connection point here. He was working already with the DGA, and he reached out to UQID and asked if we could possibly help build a program of professional development for this cohort from Indonesia that included lab technicians, aquaculture farmers. So UQID went in talks with DGA and Professor Ron Johnson. We put together a program of work for them. We set this up and contracted this also through the School of Environment and Genetics to help deliver this program. Next slide, thanks. So these were our participants in the labs here at UQ, Professor Andy Barnes and Ben Moss and team at School of Environment, Dr. Melanie Sellers from Genetics. This cohort, as I was saying, is from aquacultural farmers to lab technicians to fish health officers and policy development officers. And this is the kind of testimonials that we get from our participants in our programs. And it's this sort of feedback that really helps us get a guide for, you know, how things are being taken by the participant cohort, if they're able to reapply this learnings that they're able to do. And from here, we also get the opportunity to go in talks with the DGA if there's any further programs that they would like to do with any of these cohorts. Next slide, thank you. This was another program that I ran just earlier this year. So this was part of the Australia Awards Short Course program. This is the Women in Executive Leadership Development. It was a cohort of 18 ladies from Pakistan. The Australia Awards programs are typically run with a pre-course component, a core program and a post-course. Quite often we have our delivery team go in country for our pre-course facilitation, or it's run online. We have our core program here in Australia, which usually is 1 or 2 weeks here in Brisbane, quite possibly time also in Canberra. Usually involves a lot of site visits. And then we have our post-course, which again is quite often online, or it may mean that the delivery team gets to go across to the country of where we've engaged. So the theme for this one was women leading in adaptive environments and leadership in context. The participants were to develop a return to work plan. So they have a real piece of work that is provided as a core output for the program. And the implementation of this return to work plan is also signed off by their supervisors so that we make sure that we've got full collaboration on the ground back in their home country. Next slide, please. An example of the activities within such a program. This particular lady, Seema, who was a participant in this program, she was wanting to find or develop Urdu readers that were contextually relevant for the children in this area. This is a regional area of Pakistan. And what we found, or what she found rather, through her return to work plan and her motivations was the children here were reading stories about things that were relevant to city kids. So when they're trying to engage and learn, nothing was relevant, and it was making it a lot harder. So this lady is developing a set of readers and brainstorming, finding ways to develop that, prototype it, and get those books into these regional communities for the children. Next slide, thanks. This is another example. This lady, Ursa, who's a female engineer, she realised that a big challenge was the insufficient representation of women in senior level positions. There was inadequate mentorship for women. So it was about empowering female engineers. She hit lots of hurdles. You know, there's gender biases, cultural norms that she's having to work through on every levels. Lack of supportive networks, underrepresentation and uninspiring workplaces. So she's already well underway in building lots of success in the development of her return to work plan. And the Australia Awards team do check in and also monitor how far these ladies have got beyond our program. Next slide, thank you. These are the ladies from Pakistan, just a bit of feedback. So, you know, they're acknowledging the ties that we have here and the efforts that we all go to, the bridging the gap in the continents and the hearts and souls. And thank you. Next slide, please. So this is what I love about ID. It cuts across all sectors, contributing to impactful outcomes for people and communities globally. And we too learn so much along the way. The professions I have worked with in this industry are many. And at the end of the day, it really is just about us wanting to do impactful things for other people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Janine. Bear with me 2 seconds while I swap over from the other slides. Excellent. Thank you so much. That's enough of the slides. They fix themselves in the last minute. But that was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing such a personal journey for you in international development and all the different diversities of experiences that you've had. It's really made a difference to, I guess, the work and knowledge that you bring with us to our team in international development, as well as the contributions you make to the participants who join us here at UQ. So thank you. We've had a look. I think Risti's already answered 1 or 2 of the questions in the chat. So thank you so much, Risti, for being so proactive. But this is an opportunity, I guess, for anybody to come forward with any questions or comments or wanting to share some of their story or how they've engaged with some of these programs, maybe from the other side. You're welcome to turn on your cameras or turn on your microphones and come forward. Or if you'd like, you can pop your question into the chat as well. That's okay if there's no questions. I've got some ones that I've pre-prepared for you just in case we are sat in silence. So, Risti, did you turn your mic off? Did you have anything you'd like to add?
I was actually just want to say, Janine and her colleagues at the UQID, they've done, like wonderful job through that short courses. And I can also give a testimony that the impact that they create through that work. And I just feel privileged to be part of that journey and seeing the pathway that the participants have gone through. We didn't just, like the women in STEM Mongolia, for example. I see my colleague here, Nicole Russ, has been a fantastic project course coordinator. Within 1 month after they complete their work in Australia, they already set up like a new mentorship program in mining and in solar engineering and running a couple of leadership trainings. So it's just, I think, it's something that Australian government needs to invest more. And again, I just want to say good job, Janine and team at the UQID.
Thank you, Risti. That's really kind of you. And I know that the team feels very much the same about yourself and your colleagues who work with us as well in those programs. So thank you very much for sharing that. We have only got about 5 minutes left. I just want to check that nobody has any questions. And if not, then I guess just one quick question, if I can ask it to you. And it can be for both of you as well, if you'd like to answer. But you've had really diverse experiences in the different type of work that you've done. Do you think there is a preferred or most impactful pathway to development work for you personally? And is it something that you're currently doing or something you'd like to do in the future? So Risti, would you like to go first?
I would say, relating to the 4 typical pathways to impact, I would say capacity building is probably the most powerful one. I came from a background who've done more policy analysis, and in the past, I used to see policy is the most powerful pathway to impact. But I still acknowledge the importance of it, but I can see like how capacity building programs and the connections they build throughout that capacity programs, like short courses and the capacity building programs that we do as part of our research, for example, targeting female farmers, introduction to innovation, that sort of thing, that would have like a long lasting impact. And that might become, the change might be at the micro level, but if we do that in, across these different fields and sectors, then we can see like a bigger impact than just sort of like a one-off policy interaction.
Thank you, Risti. Janine, can I invite you to answer the same question?
Thanks, Jess. Oh, yeah, as you say, we come from very different backgrounds. There's lots of buzzwords being used in the international development sector for sure. And I'm very passionate about the idea of locally led development. I definitely think it's learning, but it's learning on both sides of the street. And I think these programs, whilst they are very structured, the people connections that we get, and this is what I love about UQID and doing project delivery, is I get to meet all these people in the flesh, and we get to share stories, hear about what they're trying to do on the ground, and eventually, hopefully, steer that in a better outcome for them. Yeah.
Excellent. No, I couldn't agree more. And I think something that all three of you may have mentioned in passing or indirectly as part of your presentations was talking about that partnerships take time to build. And you do need sometimes to be in front of a person to build that connection, especially with people from different cultures. So the opportunity to do that as part of our programs has been incredible. But also what we get back from that as well, like the interest in people in wanting to engage with us when they actually are part of these programs has been incredible. So yeah, that was one of my key takeaways, was definitely that partnerships take time to build, and that you can rush them necessarily sometimes in a 2-week stint. So
yes, that's right. Thanks, Jess.
That's okay. Thank you all. Well, thank you very much for coming to join us today. I'm very grateful for all of you. Thank you so much for your patience while we were dealing with that little box that eventually disappeared all of its own accord. I didn't do anything to change it. I can't give you any advice on how to do that, remove it in the future. But yeah, thank you for joining us. We would love your feedback. I'll be sending out a survey after this, just to an email addressed. If you have any suggestions on our next community practice topic, or if you would like to come and present on some of the work that you're doing here at UQ, we'd love to hear from you. But for now, thank you very much, and please enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Thanks.
Thank you, Jess. Thank you, everyone. Thanks
very much.
Interesting.